told you that the reason that you've struggled to lose weight and get healthy is not because there's something wrong with you, or because you're over 40 and your metabolism has stopped working, or because you're just weak and you lack the willpower to make the necessary changes in your life? What if I told you it was something bigger than that? Something a lot more sinister? What if I told you that the reason that you've probably struggled, maybe even your whole life, is because big food and big pharma have literally been conspiring against you? They want you sick and fat because it's in their best interest, not in yours. And they are very, very good at what they do. Well, then buckle up, friends, because this is the episode where I put it all on the line. Because frankly, it is time to talk about what's really going on. Welcome to the Feel Better, Live Free podcast brought to you by Thinlicious. I'm your host, Ruth Soukup, and here we'll talk about everything from the science of weight loss to practical tips for making your health a priority in the midst of a busy life. It's a little bit nerdy, a little bit funny, and a little bit revolutionary. So buckle up, friend, because it's about to get real. Hey there, and welcome back to the Feel Better, Live Free podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ruth Soukup, and I am the founder of Thinlicious and the creator of the Thin Adapted System, as well as the New York Times bestselling author of 7 books. And I am also a 40-something-year-old woman who has struggled to lose weight and get healthy. It is a battle that I fought for so many years, constantly trying everything I knew how to do to lose weight and get healthy. One diet after another, sometimes losing a few pounds and always gaining it right back. The only thing that I didn't try was Ozempic, but that's only because it wasn't actually a thing back then. Because believe me, had it been around when I was fighting this battle, I probably would have been first in line. Because honestly, I was so desperate to fix that piece of my life. And if you're listening to this podcast because you too are struggling with this, then you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. How not feeling good about your body and not feeling good about the way that you look and how you feel, it starts to impact everything else in your life. It's hard to feel good in your clothes. You're always self-conscious and you're self-critical and you start avoiding pictures and don't even want to look at yourself in the mirror. You start saying no to everything. You start hiding. It basically starts eroding your confidence in your life. And on top of that, you just don't feel good, right? You're tired all the time. You feel bloated and gassy and you've got heartburn and indigestion or sometimes even chronic pain and headaches and inflammation. It's just this vicious cycle, right? It's hard to get motivated to do something about it because you're so exhausted all the time. But there's no way to stop feeling exhausted unless something actually changes, right? Unless you actually change something in your life. Believe me, I get it. And for me, it was not until I decided to take a totally different approach that things finally started to turn around. And the biggest thing for me was that I finally stopped looking for a quick fix, another crash diet. And instead, I decided to do some real research into the actual science of weight loss and why we gain weight in the first place. And honestly, as I started to do all this research, what I discovered shocked me because it is so different from everything that we have ever been told about what's healthy and what's not healthy and what makes us lose weight and what makes us gain weight. Our whole lives, we've basically been told to eat less and exercise more, and that weight loss is just calories in and calories out. But that's not actually true, not even a little bit, especially for women and especially for women over 40. Because as it turns out, the thing that regulates our weight isn't actually calories, it's hormones. And so as I started to change the way that I was eating in a way that restored balance to my hormones and reversed insulin resistance and healed my gut, the weight just started to come off without dieting, without drugs, without making myself miserable. I lost 40 pounds in 6 months. And for the first time ever in my entire adult life, I didn't gain it all right back. And I've easily maintained that weight loss for years now. And let me just tell you, because I can't even express how huge this is. After struggling with this for so long, it felt and it still does feel like freedom. And that is why I am so freaking passionate about this work. It is why I started Thinlicious. It's why I started this podcast, because I can't help but want to share it and help other women find that same freedom. But I think that it has also unlocked a passion inside of me to really get to the truth of what's actually going on and exactly why so many of us are struggling with this exact same thing. And honestly, I think it's a little bit like going down the rabbit hole, you know? You start to go deeper and deeper and deeper, and you start seeing all these connections, and you start to realize that it's not just your experience. It's not just you this is happening to. There's actually something that is much bigger going on. And so that's sort of where I'm at. I feel like there's all these things that I haven't quite dared to just come out and say and to be totally blunt about it. And honestly, it's a little bit scary, I think, especially in this day and age. You have to be so careful about what you say because, oh my goodness, what if people call me a crazy conspiracy theorist? What if I get too political and I offend somebody? What if big food and big pharma and the powers behind them come after me because they don't like what I'm about to say? What if I get censored or blacklisted or canceled or shut down? And we've seen so much of that over the past few years, right? Anything that goes basically against the mainstream message gets labeled as misinformation. And so, frankly, the threat of that has always been enough to hold me back a little bit, right? To just kind of keep me in my place and keep me silent. After all, this is my business. This is my livelihood. It is, and it's not just mine, right? It's how I support my whole family. And I have a whole team of people who work for me who count on this business too. But I really feel like I cannot hold back anymore. I cannot not talk about this because, frankly, it's too big. It's too important. It's too intricately related to the very thing that I'm trying to help people with, which is to lose weight and get healthy by actually healing your body from the inside out. And in order to really do that, you have to understand just what the forces are that have been conspiring against you for basically your whole life. So let's do this, guys. Let's just lay it out there before I lose my nerve. Real quick, though, I do want to say a couple of things before I forget. So, first of all, if you are new to Thinlicious and new to this podcast and you want to understand more about how our program works and why it works, then be sure to grab our free guide. It is called Flip the Switch, and it's really good. It's very meaty. It's very helpful. It'll walk you through kind of the basics of how our program works and why it works and show you how to get started. You can get that for free at thinlicious.com/guide. Once again, that link is thinlicious.com/guide. The second thing that you need to know, whether you are new or not to this podcast, is that 3 weeks from today, we are launching our brand new app, which is specifically designed to make implementing our program easier and way more convenient. When we're launching that to a very small group of early adopters, and I did a special bonus episode last week telling you all about it and why I think it's going to be such a game changer. So go and listen to that if you haven't yet. But for now, know that if you want to be first in line to get access, then you have to get on the wait list, which you can do at thinlicious.com/waitlist. Okay, so that's that. And yes, I do think I was probably stalling a little bit because honestly, like, I'm feeling a little nervous to really get into this. But I listened to a podcast a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you saw it or heard about it. It was a guy named Callie Means who went on the Tucker Carlson show to talk about Ozempic. And say what you want about Tucker Carlson. He's not totally my favorite either. He always makes that dumb face, like that weird face. But this one was a must listen, right? This episode, it was so good because this is a guy that used to work for Big Pharma and he has seen the truth of what they are doing firsthand. And a lot of what he was saying was not totally new to me, but it was still shocking and like almost sickening. I was so sick to my stomach as I was listening to it because he was laying it out so clearly and factually with tons of statistics to back up everything that he was saying. And he was so calm and so well spoken and so matter of fact about all of it. But like I said, I felt so sick to my stomach because you realize that they're doing it on purpose. They want us to be sick. They want us to be fat because that's how they make all their money. And not only that, they're paying off all of the people that should be protecting us and advocating for us, the doctors and the medical schools and the government agencies and the media. There's no one standing up for us, for you and for me. There is no one to stand in the gap and say, hey, wait a minute. Guys, this is bullshit, right? They're literally killing us slowly and nobody is doing anything about it. And I think that is the really, really scary part. But here's what I think. Knowledge is power. And once you see it and you understand what's really happening, that's when you have the power to do something about it. So let's break it down, okay? I'm just going to warn you right now that this episode is probably going to be a little longer than usual because I have a lot that I want to cover and I want to sort of lay it out step by step. So, first, I'm going to talk about big food and how they have very intentionally created this monster of an obesity epidemic, unlike literally anything that we've ever seen before. And then I'm going to talk about big pharma and their so-called solutions and how those solutions and cures basically just make the problem worse. And then I'm going to talk about the money trail, basically the corruption and the greed that is at the heart of all of this and how it all connects together. And then finally, I'm going to talk about the solution and what we can actually do about it. Because as scary as all of this stuff is, I refuse to believe that we are powerless. So, first up, there's the food industry, right? AKA big food. And most people don't even realize that this isn't just some cute name or catchphrase. When I say big food, I'm literally talking about a $1 trillion industry that has absolute control over the global food supply. It controls what gets grown and what gets harvested and what gets processed and what gets packaged and what gets distributed and what gets sold in every single grocery store and market in the world. It controls what you eat. And it's probably controlling what you think about what you eat as well. And not only that, I'm not even talking about thousands of different companies, right? If we think about the whole world and all the different food companies, you would think, oh my gosh, there must be so many, right? No, there's 10. There are 10 massive food conglomerates that control more than 90% of the food that you see in the grocery store. They're Nestle, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, Unilever, Danone, General Mills, Kellogg's, Mars, Associated British Foods, and Mondelez. That's it. 10. So right there, just think about that. Think about the power that comes from basically controlling all of the world's food. And then also think about ultimately, what is every single company's goal? To make more money and to make more profit, right? That's it. That's what every company is trying to do. They're trying to make more money and make more profit. And so right away, you have to realize that the interests of the food companies are not in line with your interests. They want you to buy as much as possible, which means they want you to eat as much as possible, which means it is in their best interest to make their food as addictive as possible. And believe me, they are working hard at making their food as addictive as possible. They have whole teams of scientists dedicated to ensuring that you truly can't just eat just one, right? That's like Lay's slogan. I bet you can't eat just one. Can you imagine? Why did they come up with that? They know. They've already made that bet because they've hired teams of scientists to make sure. And on top of that, they want to be able to produce their food as cheaply as possible. So that means using ingredients that can be mass produced as cheaply as possible, which usually means things like ultra processed chemicals and high fructose corn syrup. Because let's face it, right? The closer it is to nature, the more expensive it's going to be. But the more fillers and chemicals that they can add, the cheaper it is to produce. And you would think that this would all be pretty obvious to all of us, right? That all of this highly processed food and artificial stuff that we're consuming can't possibly be good for us. It can't possibly be good for our health or for our waistlines. Like, it seems so obvious when you think about it, right? That eating real food, real fruits and vegetables and meat and dairy is always going to be better for us than eating all of that junk. And I think that at first it actually was, right? I think at first when all of this processed stuff started coming out, people still were choosing the real stuff. And that's why the food industry had to get really creative. they had to start controlling the narrative. And basically, that's when they started lying to us. That's when it all began. And this started way back in the 1960s, so more than 50 years ago now, first with the sugar industry, when they secretly funded a number of studies that were specifically intended to downplay the risk of sugar while blaming heart disease and coronary heart disease and stuff that was coming out. There was a lot of evidence that these things that they were creating, right, these fake foods were not good, and especially that the sugar was not good. And there was evidence that was starting to come out, and the sugar industry wanted to suppress it. So they funded a bunch of studies. And back then, you didn't have to say who was funding the studies. So they basically rigged the system. And so they had these studies that came out that said, oh, sugar's not bad, it's fat. Fat is the thing that's bad. And so this is what kicked off this huge backlash against saturated fat. And surprise, surprise, this created an instant demand for things like highly processed vegetable and seed oils, Crisco, vegetable oil, margarine, right? Because up to this point, even though those products existed because they had first been developed, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, people weren't really sold on them. Butter and lard were still the thing that most people were using for cooking. And then this fake study, which was directly funded and orchestrated by the food industry, became this big thing. And the American Heart Association, also largely influenced by special interest lobbyists who are funded by, you guessed it, the food industry, became the gold standard for what to eat and what not to eat. All of a sudden, butter and lard were bad, right? That was the message. And that was what all the news articles and everything was saying. Carbohydrates and vegetable oils were good. And that messaging was everywhere. It is what began to be taught in medical schools and still is to this day. And it fundamentally changed the way that we ate as a society. And so if you go back and look at the recommended dietary guidelines from the 1970s, which were developed by a committee that was heavily influenced by the food industry, you'll see that's exactly what happened. And that's when we started to see a massive increase in the consumption of processed carbohydrates, sugar, white flour, other highly refined grain products. It's when we started to see the introduction of low fat and fat free products in the grocery store. Remember, like the fat free craze of the 80s and 90s? Everything was fat free. And it's also right when we started to see a massive increase in the rates of obesity and heart disease and type 2 diabetes. So all of a sudden, everybody thinks they're eating healthier because they're eating what the food industry is telling them to eat. And all of these rates of obesity and heart disease and type 2 diabetes start to skyrocket. Does that seem like a coincidence to you? It's not. Because the truth is that fat is not actually what's making us fat, right? It's not causing heart disease. It's not what's causing all of these health problems that we're seeing at epidemic levels around the world. 80% of adults are overweight in this country. 50% of teens are overweight, a higher percentage than ever before. And eating too much sugar and too many carbohydrates is what's making us sick. It's what's making us fat. It's what's causing heart disease and type 2 diabetes and metabolic syndrome and high blood pressure and inflammation and a whole slew of other health problems. In fact, there is a growing body of evidence that shows that a diet that's high in carbohydrates and sugar and processed food is the single biggest contributing factor to almost all of the chronic health problems that we face today. It's what's making us sick, and the food industry knows it. And yet, they continue to perpetuate the lie that fat is bad because they know that if they can keep us eating a highly processed carbohydrate-rich diet, then they will keep making money. And guys, I'm just getting started on this. Because the second big lie that the food industry wants us to believe is that processed foods are healthy, right? That all of these low fat and fat free products that they've been selling us for years are actually good for us. That it's better to eat a processed food full of chemicals and preservatives and artificial ingredients than it is to eat a whole natural food that might actually contain some fat. And honestly, this is a lie that is so insidious because it's not always something that is actually said, right? It's not like you see a commercial for Twinkies with a voiceover that says Twinkies because it's healthier than eating an avocado. They're not that overt about it, but it's everywhere. It's in the packaging and the labeling of products. It's in the buzzwords and the claims that a product is heart healthy, right? Walk down the cereal aisle and look at how many things in the cereal aisle say heart healthy, heart healthy, heart healthy, right? And they're not. They're not even a little bit. It's in the way that certain products are displayed in grocery stores so that they look like they're a healthier option. It's in the way that food manufacturers use marketing and psychology to make us believe that their products are good for us, even when they're not. And we keep falling for it over and over and over again because we're busy and we're tired and we're overwhelmed and we want to believe that there's an easier way. We want to believe that we can just keep eating the same foods we've always eaten because they're healthy, right? Because it says it on the package. They're good for us. But the truth is, almost all of the food in the grocery store, especially the food in the middle aisles of the grocery store, is highly processed and full of chemicals and preservatives and artificial ingredients. And almost all of it is really bad for us. And again, the food industry knows it, but they don't care. Because, like I said, processed foods are cheap to produce. They're easy to make. They're easy to package. They have a long shelf life. They're easy to sell and they're super profitable. In fact, the profit margins on processed foods are more often more than 100%, meaning that for every dollar that they're spending to produce and market the product, they're making more than $1 in profit. And that's a lot of money. But it's not just the money. The food industry has invested billions and billions of dollars in research and development, in understanding human behavior and psychology, and in developing products that are literally addictive. They've created this perfect storm of chemicals and ingredients that make it almost impossible for us to stop eating it, right? They know exactly what they're doing. And they know that if they can get us hooked on their processed foods, then we'll keep buying them over and over and over again. And that's exactly what's happening. In fact, did you know that the average American now gets 60% of their daily calories from highly processed foods? 60%. And that's not even the worst of it because it's not just the adults who are eating this way, but our kids too. In fact, the biggest consumers of processed foods are teenagers. And that's also why we're seeing a massive increase in childhood obesity and type 2 diabetes and all of these health problems that only used to affect adults. It's heartbreaking, honestly, and it makes me so angry because these companies know exactly what they're doing. They know that they are destroying our health and they don't care as long as they keep making money. So that's the second big lie, right? That processed foods are healthy. And there's probably a lot more that I could say about the food industry and all of the underhanded things that they're doing to make sure that we keep eating a steady stream of their garbage. But the food industry is actually only half the problem, right? It's the half that makes us sick. But big pharma is the half that keeps us sick. And I guess we're already halfway down this rabbit hole. So we might as well just keep on going, right? Oh boy. And honestly, when I start thinking about big pharma, I'm not even sure where to start because there are so many thoughts about this floating inside my head right now. But I liked the way that Callie Means put it in that podcast that I mentioned earlier. He said, if the fish tank is dirty, you clean the fish tank. You don't drug the fish. And that, in a nutshell, is exactly what's wrong with the pharmaceutical industry. Their goal is not to actually heal us. They don't want to clean the fish tank. They want to drug the fish. Because just like the food industry, their ultimate goal is to make more money and more profit. And just like the food industry, the way they make more money is to get us to buy as much as possible and to keep buying over and over and over and over again. Because drugs are cheap to produce, but expensive to develop. So the more we keep taking the same drugs over and over and over again, the more they convince us that we need them and that we need to keep taking them, the more profit lands in their pockets. So think about it. There is a direct conflict of interest in creating drugs that actually heal us because then we won't need them anymore. If we're healed, they stop making money and they don't want to stop making money. So keeping us sick, but masking the problem or just alleviating the symptoms while the underlying condition goes totally unchecked is really the goal. Think about that. How sick is that? And what else? Like if a drug causes side effects that in turn require more drugs to help alleviate that side effect, then it's almost like an added bonus, right? More drugs for everybody. And so, I mean, there's so many things I could say about this, but let's take Ozempic as an example and talk about that because now Ozempic is everywhere and everybody's taking it and everybody's talking about it, right? And the doctors are pushing it like crazy because they're being incentivized to push it like crazy because Ozempic is basically the perfect drug, right? as it's being prescribed, even to teenagers, you're being told that it is a lifetime drug, that you have to take it for the rest of your life or you will gain all the weight back. Think about the money there is to be made providing a drug that 80% of the population that's overweight could be on for life. Because at the same time, they're saying things like, oh, you don't need to actually change what you eat. Why would you do that? Why would you change what you eat? You don't even have to worry about what you eat if you're on Ozempic. Just take Ozempic and it'll fix the problem. But it doesn't actually fix the problem. It just creates more problems. And the side effects from Ozempic are severe, right? They're bad. They are scary. It's not even legal in other countries besides the US because it's so dangerous. It causes major gastrointestinal issues and stomach paralysis, in some cases, permanent stomach paralysis. It has been shown to cause severe depression, suicidal thoughts, most likely because it messes with your digestive system and all of your serotonin, which is responsible for your mood regulation, is produced in your gut, right? So if you mess up your digestive system, you're going to mess up your ability to regulate your moods as well. So you're basically setting yourself up for a lifetime of dependency on a drug that makes you feel awful most of the time. And when I think about this, like, it infuriates me. It makes me so mad. Viscerally, it makes me sick to my stomach to see this happening and to know what's going on and to also, at the same time, understand so well the misery and desperation that so many women feel about this part of our lives, that we are willing to literally trade our well-being and our happiness for the chance to be thin. Because, like I said way at the beginning, had Ozempic been around a few years ago before I dove deep down this rabbit hole, I probably would have been first in line. And I have many friends who have chosen that path, and I have no judgment for them because I really, truly, truly get it. And at the same time, it is not what I want. It is not what I want for anyone. It is not what I want for anyone I know. It is not what I want for anyone I don't know, because now I realize that this is not the solution. Big food and big pharma have literally set us up for failure, and we are all caught in their trap. And it's not even just Ozempic, right? I mean, that's the one that's on the forefront right now and the one that's directly related to weight loss. But there's things like statins, which are terrible and basically useless, and yet prescribed to more than 45% of adults over the age of 50. And then there are all the different antidepressants, which are now prescribed to like something like 25% of adult women. All these antidepressants that don't actually cure depression. And this one is personal to me too, because I have struggled with depression. In my early 20s, I almost died from it. I attempted suicide 5 times and came very close to succeeding. And in those almost 3 years that I was in and out of psychiatric hospitals, I was prescribed so many drugs, one after another, after another, after another, after another. I think I've been on every antidepressant that's out there. But do you know what a single doctor never asked me in all those 3 years, even being at the best, most prestigious psychiatric hospital in the country? They never asked, what are you eating? What are you doing to take care of your body? How's your gut health? Are you getting the right vitamins and nutrients? And I can only speak for myself here, but I know that I wasn't, right? Now, when I look back at how I wasn't taking care of myself at that time, I see what the problem was. And I also can tell that I didn't get better until I started taking care of my body. I stopped taking all of the drugs and I started exercising and I started getting outside every day. And I got really into nutrition and cooking amazing, healthy food for every meal. Granted, I went vegan for a while, which I wouldn't actually recommend. But I think the fact that I was eating nothing but healthy, whole foods and avoiding all of the processed crap was actually a really big deal. Suffice to say, I don't believe that Big Pharma has your best interest at heart. They don't have my best interest at heart. They don't have any of our best interest at heart, right? But buckle up, friends, because it gets worse. Because when you follow the money trail, that's when you really start to see how big and pervasive the problem is. And also, probably why no one is actually talking about this and why this podcast episode is probably going to get me censored or canceled or who knows what else. And if you've watched any of those movies that have come out recently about the opioid crisis, right? Pain Hustlers was one, Painkiller was another one. I forget the name of the other ones. you sort of get to see a glimpse of what I'm talking about. But frankly, I feel like those movies, they sort of miss the bigger point or the bigger picture, right? Because yes, the opioid crisis has been awful and terrible and so devastating. And while those movies do show a lot of the greed at the heart of the crisis, they focus more on the devastation of the opioids themselves without really recognizing that it wasn't actually about the type of drug they were peddling, right? Opioids are bad, don't get me wrong. But it's the way that the whole industry is structured, and that creates this allowance for profit and greed above people's well-being, right? It's the system. It's the way the whole system is structured. We have a system in the United States where pharmaceutical companies, through their drug reps, heavily incentivize doctors through perks and trips and overpaid speaking engagements to prescribe more and more and more and more drugs. And if you think that that's only happening with opioids, right, that was a isolated incident, then wake up. Why do you think Ozempic has suddenly exploded and everyone is prescribing it, right? Why do you think that's true? Because the doctors are being incentivized. And the more drugs they get these doctors to prescribe, the more the drug reps make. So everyone's incentive is not helping you. It's making more money, like huge, obscene amounts of money. And don't get me wrong here, because I'm not saying that I think all doctors are evil, money grubbing pill pushers, right? I don't actually believe that. And I also believe that at some point, most doctors probably went to medical school because they wanted to help people, right? The Hippocratic Oath that they still take says, first do no harm. But they've been beaten down and they've been brainwashed by a system that is rigged right from the start. Because do you know who funds 70% of all medical schools in this country? The pharmaceutical companies. Do you know who literally writes the textbooks that the doctors are learning from? The pharmaceutical companies. Everyone is bought and paid for, but they just don't realize it. And that's just the way the system works. It's a broken system that is totally stacked in Big Pharma's favor. And you know what they don't teach in medical schools? Using food as medicine. Most doctors don't get more than a few hours of nutrition training in all the years they attend school, right? How many years do you have to go to medical school? It's years and years and years. And out of that, it's just a few hours, an afternoon spent learning about nutrition. And all of that training that they're learning, even just those few hours, is still basically based on the flawed studies from the 1960s that were bought and paid for by the sugar industry. So the doctors either aren't seeing it, or they're so caught up in the perks that come from going along with the system that they just look the other way, right? They feel like, well, if I can't beat them, I might as well join them. So then you might ask, well, where is the government in all of this? Isn't it their job to protect the people? Don't they care that all this is happening? Well, sadly, not really, because for a lot of the same reasons, big pharma and big food have deep, 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 deep pockets, which means they can afford to pay the lobbyists and the special interests big money to create policies that feed their system. And if you look it up, you will see that the big pharmaceutical companies and the big food companies are near the very top of every list of lobbyists, right? All the top spending lobbyists are there. All the pharmaceutical companies are there. All the big food companies are there. They're spending billions of dollars on this. And then you might think, well, surely the media would raise hell about all of this, right? Isn't that what journalism is for? To expose corruption and greed and to show all this stuff, right? Especially the corruption and greed that is directly affecting the health of every single person in this country. Well, not so much. And it's easy to follow the money trail there too, because in 2023, guess what industry spent the most money on media advertising? Yep, it was Big Pharma. And guess which industry was second? And I know you're going to be shocked by this. It was Big Food. So if you've ever wondered why every single ad, or almost every single ad you see, is either pushing some new drug or making you crave more of that crap processed food that's killing you, you're not imagining it, right? Those two industries have pretty much obtained total control over our health because it's in their best interest to keep us sick and fat. Are you starting to see the problem here? It runs so deep. It is so ingrained in the fabric of our society that I feel like sometimes it feels almost impossible to escape. It's everywhere. They own everything. They're controlling all the messaging. And that's why I also believe that if you have struggled with losing weight and getting healthy, it is truly not your fault. This whole system is rigged. It is rigged, and it is not your fault. So, what's the solution then? Because at the end of the day, I refuse to believe that we are powerless in all of this. And I don't know about you, but I also refuse to be a victim of a system that is stacked against me. So, the first thing that I want to say is that the solution to all of this is actually really, really simple, at least when it comes to your health and to your own body. Okay? You can change this. You can start changing this today. You got to stop eating all the sugar and the processed crap and start eating a diet that is rich in healthy fats and nutrient dense proteins. It is the answer, it is the solution. This is what is going to heal your body from the inside out. It's the thing that will balance your hormones and will heal your gut and reverse your insulin resistance, which will in turn reduce your inflammation and solve 99% of all of those other weight-related health issues that you're dealing with, without drugs, without dieting, without making yourself miserable. That's it, right? I promise you, if you start eating that way, that is what will happen for your body. You will heal it. It will heal itself. Your body is very resilient. But when you keep putting all that processed crap inside of it, the insulin resistance skyrockets, right? It's wreaking havoc on your hormones. It's doing all of this stuff, but it's 100% reversible. But just because it's simple doesn't mean it's always easy, right? Because in theory it's simple, but in practice, there's all these factors that are working against us, right? There's a whole system that is actively working against you. And that's honestly why I think having the right support is so key, right? Because it's hard to fight a system like this all on your own. But I also think that knowledge and understanding is the first step in changing the system. We have to actually talk about this stuff. We have to start shining a light on what's really going on. We have to be bold. And I know it is not easy. I mean, look how long it has taken me to actually say all of this and record this podcast episode. But frankly, it's criminal. It's abhorrent. It is literally killing us. 80% of the adult population in the US is now overweight. 90% of the population has some form of insulin resistance. Over 50% of the population is diabetic or pre-diabetic. We are dying from preventable diseases that are a direct result of the greed and corruption of a system that wants to keep you sick and fat. And even if we're not dying, we're not living. Our best years are being stolen from us because we don't feel good. And that's bullshit. So rise up, friends. Rise up. Start talking about it. Start by sharing this episode with everybody you know. Let's start shouting it from the rooftops. Because if enough people decide to stop buying into a system that is keeping us sick, if enough people are willing to say, wait a minute, no, we're not going to take it anymore, they will have to change, right? Because there are more of us than there are of them. So welcome to the health revolution. Once you see it, you can't unsee it, and there's no turning back now. Okay, you guys, I guess that's probably it for this oral manifesto that I had for you today. I hope that it gave you a lot of food for thought. And honestly, I hope that it made you angry enough to actually want to do something about it. At the very least, to make changes to the way that you are eating, but also to start speaking up. So please start by sharing this episode with everyone you know. Let's be brave together. And honestly, I would love to continue this conversation. So if you are not already part of our Health Rebel Facebook group, please go search for it on Facebook. You can either search for Health Rebel or search for Thinlicious, and it should come up. And then once again, if you are new to Thinlicious and to this podcast and you want more information about how our program works and why it works to help you lose weight and get healthy by balancing your hormones and reversing insulin resistance and healing your gut without drugs and without dieting, without making yourself miserable, then go to thinlicious.com/guide and grab our free guide. And that's all for today, you guys. I will see you back here for another new episode very soon.